When Google announced they're going to have two classes of shares, I expected institutional investors to rise up in revolt and say, this is not something that's acceptable, but that's not what we saw. We saw institutional investors say, that's okay because you guys are well run and well managed. So almost like they were saying a benign dictatorship is okay because, they're benign dictators.
Welcome to our latest video featuring the renowned finance expert Aswath Damodaran. In today's discussion, Damodaran will provide his expert insights on the current state of the financial markets, exploring the dramatic shifts in mood and momentum over the past month. He will address key issues such as inflation, interest rates, and the equity risk premium, offering valuable guidance for investors navigating these uncertain times. Damodaran will also delve into sector-specific analyses, including technology and entertainment, and discuss the broader implications of catastrophic risks on valuation and investment strategies. Stay tuned for a comprehensive overview of the market dynamics.
I'll tell you the biggest problem we have. I was in Latin America last week and I was in Brazil 2 weeks ago. And I took the top 20 companies in the US and I put the ages of those companies right next to the companies. And a lot of the companies are 15, 20 years old. Facebook, if you think about it, is not that old. And then I took the top 20 companies in Latin America and I put them up. And they're ancient. And I did the same thing with Europe. Ancient companies. You do that. The US, in a sense, is the outlier in this in terms of young companies not just breaking through, but making it to the top. I think the more the EU acts, the more convinced I am that Europe will never be a player in AI because in the interest of protecting consumers, they've actually created a system where if you have a young, smart, person who's got this incredible AI idea in Europe, he's going to get on a plane, fly to Silicon Valley. And it's not just that if you look at the market, the total global market cap, the US has actually increased its share of that global market cap significantly. And with China falling, you actually are getting an even larger segment of global market cap coming to the US. So even if you held a global index fund, you're going to end up being overinvested in US stocks because US equities are just taking an increasing slice of global equities. But I don't even think of these companies as US equities anymore. They might have, through the accident of history, become incorporated in the US. But these are global giants, right? They happen to be US companies. So when you buy the S&P 500, you're buying global companies that happen to be US based. So I think of my portfolio primarily now as global companies. And to the extent they're global companies, the fact that most of them are US based, I think reflects the way the rest of the world seems to be allowing or not allowing companies to catch up with the 21st century. I think, with US companies, you're seeing that explosion of young companies take off. That's a plus of what's happened in the US. That the minus is when you have these young companies explode, you're going to create I wouldn't be surprised if within my lifetime, and it's probably sooner rather than later, you get the first trillionaire. It's only a matter of time before it happens. So I think you're going to see all those side effects as well. Greater, in terms of income, wider disparities in income, and we have to be prepared for the consequences. There's a very incestuous component to this, but I think that we get the corporate governance we deserve. In 2004, when Google went public and they said, we're going to have two classes of shares, one with 10 times the voting rights, they were breaking from the pack because for a century in the US, we were moving away from that model. Because the New York Stock Exchange said, if you want to be listed on the exchange, you cannot have two classes of shares. When Google announced they're going to have two classes of shares, I expected institutional investors to rise up in revolt and say, this is not something that's acceptable. But that's not what we saw. We saw institutional investors say, that's okay because you guys are well run and well managed. So almost like they were saying a benign dictatorship is okay because, they're benign dictators. Facebook is a dictatorship. I don't even know whether it's benign or malignant, depending on what you think about Mark Zuckerberg. But we allowed Mark Zuckerberg to have the kind of power that he did because as investors, we looked the other way. Now, I remember in 2019, at the peak of Facebook's issues, a money manager complained to me that Mark Zuckerberg, I mean, he held a big stake in Facebook. He said, Mark Zuckerberg is not listening to me. And I said, buying shares in Facebook and complaining that Mark Zuckerberg is not listening to you is like getting married to a Kardashian and saying, cameras keep following you all over the place. What exactly did you expect when you married into a reality show's family? Now, investors, in a sense, have looked the other way with tech companies in terms of corporate governance. And what you're talking about is a slice of that issue. Corporate governance is dead at tech companies. If there's going to be change here, it's not going to come from the board of directors pushing for it. It's going to come from outside, and it's going to come almost entirely from the price dropping enough that they care. The reason Mark Zuckerberg woke up after that metaverse fiasco is because the stock price dropped so much. So I think it's unfortunate because we talk the talk about corporate governance. We started measuring corporate governance 20 years ago with scores. But we've actually let corporate governance become worse because we spend more time talking about it than following through with actions. The lunatics are running the asylum is my reaction, right? I mean, this is exactly why you don't buy into benign dictatorships. I mean, I think we need to go back to the original sin, which was that's okay because you guys are well run and well managed. These voting shares, the reaction was, he's such an insanely good manager. So what harm is there in giving him controlling power in perpetuity? And at that time, I remember thinking, but he's a human being. He's going to get older, and he did, and he got dementia, and the voting rights still stayed with him. They passed on to. So what we're seeing is the residue of decisions made in the 80s and the 90s. So what if Zuckerberg he will get to be 80, 85. What if he gets dementia? Who's going to be running Facebook? This is a problem we set ourselves up to repeat on all these big tech companies with voting shares with different voting rights. Shari Redstone is, let's face it. I mean, she is eccentric that's the right word. And, she might not listen to reason, but she has controlling power. So we know the entertainment business, we need to consolidate that this business is in disruption. You can't do the things you used to. And there are only 3 players outside of Netflix. It's Disney, Warner Brothers, and Paramount. And the question is, where will they go? Because everybody else is going to be a side player. What I saw happen with Shari stepping in and essentially putting a stop to this process is, you're devising a pathway to drive Paramount into essentially ruin if you don't do something. There's not a whole lot you're going to be able to do as Paramount shareholders because of something you did 25 or 30 years ago. And I want this almost to be etched into people's memories the next time some company comes along with voting and non-voting shares. I'm amazed that, maybe it's a governance issue that because Apple could buy this with petty cash, right? Any of these companies.
Yeah.
And if you think about buying content for entertainment, you're effectively getting an entire library with each of these companies that you can find better ways of using than each of these companies are. So we talk about winners getting bigger. This is going to be the next phase, is I have a feeling that a lot of the existing entertainment companies are going to become parts of the big tech companies. And you mix it up with all the other things that come with these companies. It's kind of a terrifying thought, but you're getting your news from Apple, your entertainment from Apple. I mean, I think it's only a matter of time. I think the only reason the big tech companies are avoiding it is, do you really want to buy Paramount and have to deal with Shari Redstone? I think unless you find a way to separate her from the company, no tech company will touch Paramount. So it's almost as if the presence of some of these existing people in the company makes them toxic enough that nobody wants to touch them. But you're right, at the right price, somebody's going to be tempted. And it's a morbid thought, but time sometimes takes care of some of these problems. So I'd keep a good watch on Shari Redstone's health, because that might be the dividing line of what happens to Paramount.